Hello and welcome back to Educated STEM. I am Kate, the founder of Educated STEM, and today we continue our series with Dr. Mahadeo Sukhai. So please go back and watch the many videos that we have done previously. So the first set were all about him and his journey as a low vision scientist and how that shaped his career and the things that he has managed to do. And then the second section, which is this section, is where we dive into all things DEI, or as Mahadeo likes to call it, IDEA or IDEA. So same letters with an additional A for accessibility, but IDEA as the acronym. So I'm going to ask Mahadeo to deep dive into the question, what is merit and how does it relate to DEI or IDEA?
Thanks so much, Kate, and thanks for having me back for I guess this is like the 14th time or something like that. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a joke, and I'm just going to ask if anyone is a Simpsons fan, particularly the Golden Age Simpsons from the 1990s. So there was an episode where one of the characters received an award, and it was a made-up award. The award was Outstanding Achievement in the Field of Excellence. And the awards MC for this entirely fake show about the outstanding achievement in the field of excellence said, "Excellence is defined as the condition of being excellent." And this received applause from the audience. And I tell this story because number one, it was a genuinely funny moment, but also number two, it was so funny because it's actually so true. Merit is a very, very tough thing for us to define, particularly in the research enterprise and in academia. And when we talk about merit in terms of looking for a job, that's a different issue too. Or merit when we think about grad school applications or postdoc applications. So I'm gonna talk about merit generally first, and possibly lampoon it a little bit more, and then turn around and talk about merit in research and merit in job applications and merit in school or scholarship applications, because at the end of the day, merit is, number one, it's a contextual term, and number two, it's actually a relative term, right? And so we know that person number one is potentially more meritorious than person number two by comparing some level of records of accomplishments. But we're putting weights on things when we talk about merit, right? And so we care that somebody has demonstrated some capacity to do something, some capacity to accomplish something, some capacity to learn, to grow, to teach, to work, to whatever. Right? When we think about merit in terms of scholarship applications, we care about your transcript, and we care about your record of co-curricular and extracurricular involvement, and we care about if it's grad school, we care about your publication record and how many conferences have you presented at, and poster versus oral presentation. And if we're talking about merit in terms of getting a job, like becoming employed, then we're talking about, are you meritorious in that? Do you have demonstration that you can actually do the job? Right. And so the funny thing about the term is it's not a linear translation. It's not a, if you do X, you have a degree of merit, and if you do X plus 10, you have a degree of merit compared to the previous person of merit plus 10, because those extra 10 things may not actually contribute to whatever definition of merit we are keeping in our minds at any given point in time. And so that all sounds airy-fairy because it is. And there's a bit of a punchline in that, and I'm being almost deliberately provocative when I say that, because merit has become a circular term. Merit is whatever the people in charge make it out to be, and the people in charge will make it out to be whatever it is, right? And so we genuinely don't have really good concepts of merit. Merit is not objective, right? What I consider meritorious in looking for a student, I guarantee you, is not going to be what the next person considers to be meritorious in looking for a student, right? When I hire summer students, Kate, I will tell you, I look for runway, I look for potential, I look for I look for a willingness to learn and challenge assumptions about the things that I know, or the things that I think I know. To me, those things are meritorious. But to somebody else, they might look for experience. I don't care one whit for experience, because when I applied for graduate school, I had no experience. And people picked me up and said, hey, you don't have experience, but we think you'll be successful in this environment. And so we're going to give you a chance. And so I pay that forward, because experience doesn't actually tell me you're meritorious. Experience just tells me that you've been in this space before and that you think you know what to do with it. But what if you think wrong? Then whatever merit you may be perceived to have had is actually meaningless, right? And so everyone thinks about merit differently. Everyone has a different definition of what merit is. What we think about in terms of what merit is contextually changes. So in school, it's different from in work. In industry, it's different from in academia, right? And it is circular. It is what we need it to be when we need it to be the thing that we need it to be, right? And sometimes we're consistent about it. Many times we are not consistent about it. And so I again, I'm not saying this to duck the definition of merit. I'm saying this because this is what merit has become in the spaces that we're operating in over the time that we've been operating in these spaces. The real problem with all of this is that what we often do is we often conflate merit equals accomplishment with merit equals how the accomplishment was actually demonstrated. So here's an example, right? We're scientists, and we're interested in not just generating knowledge, but also mobilizing that knowledge or translating that knowledge. So we're interested in telling the world about the knowledge that we have. But in the context of an academic job application, the tell the world about the knowledge that we have is weighted much more toward publishing in scientific journals than it is toward science communication avenues and science outreach, right? And so we actually care more about the Journal of Clinical Investigation paper than we do about the blog. We care more about the Cell Science or Nature paper than we care about the public lecture to 1,000 people, right? And so merit is not at all objective, because what we are thinking of is, I'm interested in whether this person can do an academic position, and so I want to see that they've published in academic journals, because the rest of it is meaningless, right? But let's take this a step beyond. Let's say that public lecture to 1,000 people includes within its audience a senator or a congressperson at the state level or at the federal level who listened, who paid attention, and who saw policy implications, and then who took up that cause and ran with it with your engagement as a scientist. And so at the end of the day, you've influenced state or federal policy in addition to your paper, right? Or perhaps in or perhaps in sort of contradistinction to publishing a paper in Nature, Cell, or Science, right? On the other hand, you publish a paper, right? And if you're grad students, you write a thesis, right? And so the thesis is in your university or college library. The paper is published. It might be cited. It might even be read, right? Because not everyone reads papers that they cite. We all know this. It's a dirty little fact. I'm going to state it. And I mean, there's this hoary old story, which you might have heard, Kate, of the person who slips $100 bill into the thesis that they have bound for their alma mater's library, and they go back and as an alum 30 years later, and the $100 bill is still there. Nobody's read the thesis in 30 years, right? And the problem is, that's a true story. It happens, right? So am I productive because I've written that thesis and published a paper? Or am I productive because I had to do the thesis and I gave this lecture in front of 1,000 people that changed some policymakers' minds? Which one is more meritorious, right? If you're the policymaker, you think the second one's meritorious. If you're a member of the public, you think the second one's more meritorious. If you're a member of the academy, you think the first one's more meritorious. Right? So merit is all about where we put our emphasis, where we put our weight. Right? At the end of the day, we're trying to figure out how to quantify a track record. We're trying to figure out how to quantify that this person A can do something and is B productive in the doing of the thing, but the measures of productivity are context dependent. And so you asked about how merits and inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility are intersecting and how they're related to one another. So think about who defines what's meritorious, right? If you are if you're applying for a scholarship, the scholarship adjudication committee defines what's meritorious, right? If you're applying for a job, the search committee defines what's meritorious. If you're applying for promotion in outside of academia, HR defines what's meritorious. If you're applying for a promotion in academia, the tenure committee defines what's meritorious, right? And so at the end of the day, what gets defined as merit and what gets defined as meritorious is defined by a group of people in a room looking at something, and they're looking at this thing in relation to a bunch of other people's things, and so merit becomes relative, right? And so if you are not, if you're not part of the social identity group that's making those decisions, then the question becomes whether the members of the social identity group who are making those decisions are thinking about you and your use case. Right? That's why it matters to inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility what merit is, and that's why inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility matter to merit. So here's an interesting story. There was a piece of research that was done, I'm going to say about 10 years ago now, possibly a little bit longer, and the research went something like this. The researchers were really interested in understanding what was going on with respect to gender bias in academic hiring. And they tried a bunch of different things as sort of simulated hiring exercises. And one of the things that they found was that if you had a candidate pool of 5 individuals and only one of those individuals was a woman, the likelihood of actually hiring that one person was next to 0. On the other hand, if you had 2 or more individuals out of that finalist group of 5 who were women, the likelihood of hiring any of them was actually only about 25%. And so whether you had two women, 3 women, 4 women, or all 5 women on, or actually 2 women, 3 women, or 4 women out of 5 on the on that finalist pool, the likelihood of picking a woman was only about a quarter, right? Even when it was 4 out of 5, right? But some of this has been attributed to gender bias in the hiring committee. Some of this has been attributed to organizational practice and organizational policy within the space, and ways that organizational practice and policy are interpreted. But one of the things that this actually tells us is if your definition of merit for that job is gender biased, you are more likely to hire the gender that matches the bias that defines merit, right? So there was also a human rights case in British Columbia in the early 1990s, where someone who was gendered as a woman actually was rejected from firefighter training, and she challenged this in court, and she won because all of the criteria for being a firefighter, so all of the criteria for passing training for being a firefighter, the judge found were horribly gender biased, and there was no reason for that. And so this was a landmark human rights case in Canada 30 years ago, and it led to something called the Mioran test, which actually gave rise to a whole way of thinking about merit as it relates to being able to pass a course or do a job, right? Because you could have criteria that were absolutely discriminatory, but unless you could justify the discrimination, that was not permitted, right? And so this is how, in a very long roundabout way, this is how merit and inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility are intricately intertwined. Because if your criteria for merit happen to be discriminatory by nature, and you could justify that any way you want, but if your criteria for merit happen to be discriminatory and the discrimination doesn't pass a legal test, you have a problem if somebody sues you.
Yeah. So going off script.
Yeah. Also, what
Because of course I am. I know that you must have seen individuals who are very prominent saying that DEI initiatives have basically got people into positions that they haven't earned and that they don't necessarily deserve. So what would you say to that claim?
They haven't worked for me. So if
we don't necessarily know the Mahadeo. These are very famous.
no, but I think my point is if DEI initiatives have worked to get people into positions that they haven't earned and haven't necessarily claimed, I will tell you point blank that none of those DEI initiatives have ever once worked for me, right? And so they clearly don't work all the time, right? My perspective ends up being this, right? Again, it comes down to what your weight is in terms of merit, right? Let's take the example of let's take the example of I've created a stream of research funding that is specific to researchers who are not white, right? And I've created this stream because I've actually observed that a disproportionate number of white researchers are getting funded, right? Or if you don't want to do this by skin color and race, let's do it by disability. So the proportion of research awards that are handed out to researchers with disabilities is somewhere around 1% in the United States. A good friend of mine named Bonnie Lynn Sweener, who's at Johns Hopkins, um, and does a lot of disability health equity research. She led the work to identify that particular statistic and published it, I'd say about 3 or 4 years ago now. So 1% of research awards go to persons with disabilities in the research space. But let's actually say that, for argument's sake, 5% of all researchers are researchers with disabilities, right? And so there is a disproportionate underrepresentation of persons with disabilities in research awards, right? Now, does that mean that persons with disabilities are, by definition, less capable of winning research awards? Problem is you can't say that, because if you accept sort of the anti-woke warrior premise, which is that that merit is actually set by the institution, and so the research funders shouldn't care about merit. And so if somebody's at a research institution already, what matters is the quality of the idea and the environment that they're in, right? Not who they are and how they got there. In that case, then what you're basically saying is, okay, so the disproportionate underrepresentation of persons with disabilities in research funding is because persons with disabilities have worse ideas than everybody else, or they're in worse environments than everybody else, right? And I would question either or both of those suppositions. right? And so the challenge ends up becoming that for you to turn around and say that that someone is in a position because not because of merit but because of who they are, then you actually undercut the definitions of merit that you yourself are actually espousing, right? And so you've actually created an interesting sort of double standard conceptually and cognitively within the space, and I would actually challenge you on that, and invite you to actually work to validate the fairness and impartiality of the criteria of merit that you're espousing, right? Because if you think they're fair and impartial, then let's sit down and work together and actually prove that they're fair and impartial, right? If you're not willing to have that conversation, then you don't believe that the conversation is worth your time, either because you think they're not fair and impartial because someone's going to prove you wrong, or you think you're just not interested in the exercise, and we're in sort of the schoolyard game of, I'm not going to play this competition because although I know you'll lose, I just think I'll lose more, right? And so you know, my perspective on the somebody's there not because of their merit but because of who they are, the argument works both ways. And I also think that that if you were in a position where you were going to be denied from a position because of something that happened to you or something that was part of your lived experience that you didn't think should have been germane, you'd be fighting it. So why shouldn't anybody else?
Okay, so thank you for joining me today, Mahadeo. I look forward to hearing from you for the next video where we're going to be talking about the biases built into peer review systems. So please join us for the next video on that topic. So please like and subscribe to the channel. Go and find Mahadeo over at IdeaSTEM, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you. Bye-bye.